Hello everyone, my name is Marion Cochrane and I'm the Lead Literacy Pedagogy Officer for West Lothian. I have Fiona Cowan with me today, and Fiona is a class teacher at Knightsbridge Primary School and also a literacy champion. We're going to talk to you today about the West Lothian approach to moderation of writing across the four contexts of learning. So what was the rationale for looking at this as an authority? Recent inspection advice in West Lothian revealed that there was not a robust approach to moderation of writing, and that there needed to be more opportunities to extend writing in a wider range of genres. So, as an authority, we came together with our literacy steering group to look at this and create a strategic approach. Our aims for today's session are to share West Lothian's strategic authority approach to improving writing in a range of genres across the four contexts of learning, to share the research that influenced us and how we piloted this approach with one school and then empowered literacy champions across the cluster to cascade this pedagogy, to share the impact of this improvement activity from teachers and learners' points of view. We used the moderation cycle to guide us and teased out each section. We also added in our West Lothian progression pathways to support staff in planning for learning with pace and challenge. Research told us that 93% of reading and writing in secondary schools was non-fiction. This caused us across the authority to consider the range of genres we were teaching. In Knightsbridge Primary School, we knew that we were teaching the literacy of the genres. Teachers were using the PM writing approach. They were teaching structure and language features. But were we planning writing across the four contexts of learning? And could we evidence this? We created this skill plan to ensure we were all teaching these genres at the same time, in the same way across the school, and we planned to moderate writing at designated times in our calendar. So how did we do this? We began with the school context. So let's have a look. We started in December thinking about the school fair. This was something that was happening in our school. We then moved back and thought about the genre of writing. Which one would suit this context? Should we have a school fair? This was a persuasive piece. We then moved back and thought about the four contexts, and this would sit under the umbrella of ethos and life of the school. If you think about January, in most primary schools just now, we are looking at Scotland, so this would be our context. We would be thinking about a procedure. Teachers came up with the idea of how to make shortbread, how to make an essay craft, how to dance the Dashing White Sergeant. If we move back again, you will see that this sits under the umbrella of IDL. We plan to practice writing these genres for 2 or 3 weeks in different contexts, and then on assessment week, identify a few children at the top of the register to track and monitor. Over the course of a year, all children in school would have their writing moderated at school level to ensure understanding of achievement of a level and promotion of professional dialogue. As a school, we came together to look at the moderation cycle and to plan together stage 1 and 2. We created the learning intention for early, first and second. You can see that we have bundled the E's and O's, and we co-created the success criteria with the learners. The teacher then moderates the learning prior to the assessment. The teacher identifies targets met and awards red, amber, green. This provides guidance to the other teachers who will be moderating these pieces and providing formative feedback. Here is an example of red, amber, and green pieces of writing. These are our West Lothian progression pathways, and you can see that we have identified where each learner sits on the pathway, and through professional dialogue, we were able to cite what were the next steps for the learners. We then came back together to complete the reflection and to record what we needed to do next for each one of the learners. This may have been to provide graphic organisers or perhaps look at a different level. We then provided each of the learners with formative assessment comments. Teachers spoke to the learners about how they could move forward in their learning. I'd like to pass over to Fiona, who is our literacy champion, and she's going to explain the cluster moderation process. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, Marion. Hello, everyone. We met as a cluster to plan across the BGE, and this involved the Cluster High School and our English department, who are moderating writing at third level and taking part in our cluster moderation events. So what were our cluster aims in writing moderation? The learning intention was to build confidence and consistency in moderation of writing across the 4 contexts for learning, through effective use of the moderation cycle. The success criteria was to teach the genre across the term with opportunities for breadth, challenge and application of skills in new and unfamiliar settings. Work collaboratively to identify the context for learning and co-create the success criteria with learners. To create assessments across the BGE, to use the core and genre targets to support learners to talk about their learning, use the West Lothian progression pathways, teachers' targets, and professional dialogue to discuss achievement of the level, and finally to reach a consensus of opinion, providing formative feedback and reflecting on the learning process for all. The learning intention and success criteria were created by the cluster literacy champions along with the literacy pedagogy officer. A coherent approach to raising attainment in writing through moderation and assessment. Literacy champions co-created plans and suggested context for learning, thus giving us champions ownership of learning. It was important to reflect the cluster and the school contexts. You can see the titles were covered this year. For example, our descriptive writing context was titled All About Me, and Why is Reading Important was the context for persuasive writing. What will this look like for us in practice? Literacy champions led this piece of work in each school. We used teams. There were folders with early, first, second and third level. Teachers planned lessons to ensure breadth, challenge and application. Literacy champions completed stages 1 and 2. Stage 3 was completed using the West Lothian progression pathways and benchmarks to identify next steps. Those assessments which were not submitted were ragged as well, and the pupils received verbal feedback. This is an example of a cluster timeline. The agreed timeline is tightly structured as you can see here, allowing for momentum of the moderation cycle to be maintained, but also to allow for teachers to teach the literacy of the genre for 2 to 3 weeks prior to assessment. During these weeks, the structure and language features are taught so learners are familiar with the genre and are ready to apply learning in new and unfamiliar ways, which is really important. Finally, leadership opportunities. We as literacy champions facilitated a meeting to reflect as a cluster. We arranged for teachers who moderated together across schools to share their next steps and reflections. We ensured each school was represented. Here you can see examples of the writing, targets and stage 3 reflections. Following reflections, it was evident the moderation process had increased teacher confidence and staff felt more equipped to support their learners in writing. Thank you everyone. I will now pass you back over to Marion.
Thank you, Fiona. That was really great. So where are we now as an authority? We are planning rich, valid and reliable assessments linking reading, writing and listening and talking. We are planning these across the 4 contexts of learning. For example, we have taken the persuasive writing piece, Why is Reading Important, and used this writing assessment as a context for reading and listening and talking assessments. We are linking this work to our West Lothian targets, pathways and the benchmarks. And if you look at the slide, you can see that we've pulled out the benchmarks that are linked to this for writing, listening, talking and reading. Kay has just presented her writing to her peers as a solo talk. These two girls are peer assessing this work and engaging in meaningful discussion about the presentation. Kay used very persuasive language like, I am very confident reading is important. I agree. She also used, I strongly believe. The girls then used the listening and talking placemats to support their thinking and to provide verbal and written feedback to Kay about her talk, using what went well and even better if. And finally, Alex quickly tells us reading and writing are literacy processes that are inextricably linked. It is clear that asking pupils to write about what they read can improve reading comprehension, and so we should teach them both together. You can see here Kay is talking about her own writing and identifying the genre markers. M is doing this too. When I was writing my persuasive piece on why reading is important, I used in my opinion and I vitally believe. Yes, and I used I strongly believe and to conclude. The learners go on to read another persuasive piece of text and are able to make these links between their own writing and genre markers in the new text. We have found that creating and planning rich assessments and encouraging learners to make these explicit links themselves across reading, writing, and listening and talking has really deepened learners' knowledge and understanding of genres across literacy and has promoted learner efficacy.